Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The sun blazed over the Lagos asphalt as Emeka pedaled his rusted bicycle through the chaotic traffic. The chain groaned with every spin, and the bent pedal cut slightly into his right shoe with each rotation. Sweat soaked through his faded shirt, clinging to his back as he weaved between yellow Danfo buses and hawkers shouting about gala and bottled water. It was just another morning on his way to work at the courier depot, where he delivered packages for a living. His dreams were bigger than this, but for now, this bicycle and his sheer will were all he had. As he approached a popular food joint, the screech of expensive tires pulling up beside him made him instinctively slow down. A black Benz parked, music blaring, and out stepped a woman whose laughter pierced him deeper than the heat or the hunger he had grown used to. Ah, Emeka, the bicycle king. Amaka's voice rang out like a cruel bell, laced with the sharpness of disdain and mockery. She was dressed in a silky green gown that clung to her curves, her makeup flawless, and her weave swaying with every turn of her head. Standing beside her was a tall, muscular man with sunglasses and a gold chain that glittered in the sun. It was her new boyfriend, Yemi. Emeka's legs wobbled on the pedals, but he didn't stop. He forced a smile, gave a slow nod, and continued pedaling. But the laughter followed him. Yemi leaned over, shouting, "Guy, dem still dey use bicycle for 2025? Brothers, upgrade now." The crowd at the eatery burst into laughter. Emeka kept riding, each push of the pedal heavier than the last. Behind his quiet expression was a heart torn open, not just by the insult, but by the memory of who she used to be, and who he had once been to her. As he turned the corner and disappeared from sight, the memory came rushing back like a wave. This wasn't just any girl. This was Amaka, the same girl who once had nothing but ripped slippers and a plastic plate for her wares. He had met her under a leaking zinc roof, barefoot and selling plantains, and yet now she stood dressed like royalty, laughing at him with another man. Life had come full circle, but not as he had imagined. His bicycle creaked beneath him, but his mind was already far away, back to the first day they met, when she was hungry, dirty, and sad, and he had stopped to offer her food and kind words. The past, buried beneath pain and sacrifice, began to rise from the ashes. 3 years ago, Amaka had been a shadow of the woman who now wore luxury gowns and false pride. She had no wig, no designer purse, no friends. Emeka remembered the day clearly. It was the end of a long shift at the loading bay, and he was dragging his tired legs home when he saw her sitting on a roadside bench, her plate of roasted plantains untouched, her face stained with tears. Her dress had more holes than fabric, and the way she clutched her stomach told him hunger was no stranger to her. Moved by compassion, Emeka walked up to her and offered the meat pie and bottle of water he had just bought for himself. She had hesitated, but the hunger won. She took it and whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling. That simple act began their story. They began seeing each other more often. He would intentionally pass through her street, bringing small gifts, sometimes an orange, sometimes a comb, and other times just his time. Amaka began to open up about her background. Her father had died when she was a child, her mother sold second-hand clothes at the market, and she had dropped out of school because there was no money. Emeka, who was himself an orphan living with a cousin who barely fed him, still found room in his heart to care. He helped her get a second-hand phone so she could apply for scholarships. He bought her sanitary pads when her mother couldn't afford them. And when her mother fell ill, Emeka used his transport money for 3 days to buy drugs for her. He would walk 5 kilometers just to save enough to see Amaka smile. Amaka's transformation began slowly. As she began to feel a little more confident, she attracted attention, especially from boys with flashy phones and loud mouths. Emeka noticed how she began to change. Her laughter was now sharper, her words a bit more entitled, and her new friends whispered things in her ear about how she deserved more than a bicycle boy. But Emeka didn't stop loving her. He told himself it was just a phase, that she'd remember all he had done and wait with him for the better days. He would hold her hands and say, "Amaka, just give me time." I have a plan. I won't be poor forever. And though she would nod, her eyes always wandered when a sleek car passed by. Deep inside, a seed of restlessness had begun to grow in her, one that no love alone could calm. When Emeka finally secured his first real job, a cleaning position at a logistics firm, he felt like he had won the lottery. The pay was small, but it was consistent. He could finally breathe. But instead of using the money to fix his leaking roof or buy the shoes he had long wanted, he ran straight to Amaka's house. Her school had resumed, and she had been crying about owing fees. Without hesitation, Emeka handed her his entire first salary. "Pay your fees," he said with a tired but proud smile. Amaka gasped, hugged him, and promised never to forget what he had done for her. But just a week later, she asked for more, for a phone, then for money for a new wig, and then for airtime. Emeka obliged, stretching himself thin. He began skipping meals again and borrowing from coworkers just to meet her needs. Despite the pressure, Emeka never complained. For her birthday, he remembered how she had admired a golden wristwatch in a mall display. It cost more than he earned in 2 weeks. But he saved bit by bit, skipping lunch, working extra shifts, and even selling his favorite headset just to raise the money. On her birthday, he presented it to her with trembling hands and a hopeful smile. Amaka screamed in delight, flaunted it on Instagram, but never posted or tagged him. When asked who bought it, she simply replied, "A friend." That night, when Emeka asked her why she didn't mention him, she rolled her eyes and said, "Must everyone know I'm dating a cleaner?" The words hit like a slap, but instead of anger, Emeka apologized. "I'm sorry. I'll do better." And still, he begged her to be patient. He explained again his dream, how he wanted to build eco-friendly motorcycles for Africa, how he had sketched models since secondary school, how he just needed time and support. But Amaka scoffed, saying, "Dreams don't pay bills. I need a man who can provide now." That night, Emeka sat alone in his room, staring at the cracked ceiling. His stomach was empty, but his heart was even emptier. He loved a woman who only saw his weaknesses and not his sacrifices. Still, he vowed to prove himself one day, not just to her, but to everyone who mocked him for dreaming while poor. The more Emeka gave, the more Amaka demanded. Her requests no longer came with pleas or gratitude. They came as entitlements. "You said you loved me, didn't you? Then show it," she'd say, arms folded, brows furrowed. And Emeka would comply, pushing himself to the edge to prove that his love was real. He began borrowing money from his coworkers just to maintain her weekly hair appointments and foot her mobile data expenses. Whenever he hesitated or couldn't provide on time, she would grow cold, send him voice notes filled with insults, and threaten to end the relationship. "Look, Emeka, I have options," she once hissed. "Fine boys with real money are begging me. I'm not even supposed to be here, suffering with you." Her words stung more than a slap, but Emeka would lower his voice and beg her to be patient. "I'm working hard for us, Amaka. Just wait. Our time will come," he'd whisper, more to convince himself than her. But Amaka had grown tired of waiting. She no longer saw the Emeka who once saved her from shame and hunger. Now she saw a man who had no car, no apartment of his own, and still wore the same old shoes from 3 years ago. She began to publicly criticize him. One day, at her friend's birthday party, Emeka showed up with a cake he had spent days saving for. Amaka smiled politely in front of others, but later dragged him outside and shouted, "This is why I didn't want you to come. You came with this cheap cake like we're still in a village." Her friends had laughed that night, whispering that Amaka was wasting her beauty on a dreamer. The words sank deep into her soul, reinforcing her resolve to seek a better life, even if it meant leaving the one man who had truly loved her. Her impatience had blossomed into open disrespect. Meanwhile, Emeka's own soul was collapsing under the weight of sacrifice and humiliation. Yet, he never retaliated. At night, he would sketch designs for his motorcycle project in an old notebook, even when his hands trembled from exhaustion and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. He held on to hope like it was the last thing he owned. "She'll see," he would mutter to himself, trying to erase the memory of her insults. But doubt had begun to creep in. Was love supposed to hurt this much? Was he being strong, or just foolish? Still, each morning he rose, wore his old shirt, and pedaled to work, carrying both his dreams and his heartbreak on that creaky bicycle. It was 2 weeks to Amaka's birthday, and Emeka knew he had to get her something special. Despite her recent coldness and disrespect, he still believed that perhaps, just maybe, the right gift would remind her of their early love. She had been eyeing a black designer handbag in a boutique window for weeks, always pausing to say, "One day, I'll find a man who will buy this for me." Emeka had smiled each time, taking mental note of the price. It was worth more than his monthly salary. Still, he was determined. He began skipping lunch, then breakfast. He walked to work instead of taking a bus. At night, he sold his Bluetooth speaker and earphones. He even pawned the small necklace his late mother had given him. Slowly, painfully, he raised enough money to buy the bag. On the day of her birthday, he stood outside the boutique, holding the wrapped gift in trembling hands, heart thumping like a drum. When he arrived at her place, Amaka didn't even greet him properly. She was dressed in a tight red gown, getting her makeup done. "What took you so long?" "I told you my friends are taking me out," she snapped. Emeka smiled weakly and handed her the gift. "Happy birthday, baby," he whispered. She opened it, eyes widening. For a moment, Emeka saw a flicker of the old Amaka, the one who used to smile genuinely. But it vanished quickly. "It's about time," she said, rolling her eyes. "This is the least you could do after everything." She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss him. She didn't even thank him. Minutes later, she walked out with her friends and didn't invite him along. Emeka stood there in silence, alone in the corridor, the gift bag still in his hand. His stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten all day. His body ached. His eyes stung with unshed tears. And yet, he said to himself, maybe next year things will be different. But they weren't. Amaka returned later that night drunk and laughing. Her phone had dozens of photos from a club. Her with guys popping champagne. Her dancing close to a man Emeka had never seen. When he asked who the man was, she shouted, "Are you my husband? Why are you questioning me? You, that doesn't even have a car." That was the first time she pushed him. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to break something inside him. Emeka didn't sleep that night. He sat on the cold floor, looking at the woman he had once loved so purely. The hunger in his stomach had now spread to his heart. And for the first time in years, he considered walking away. The next few weeks were foggy, a blur of pain, silence, and numbness. Amaka was barely present anymore. She spent her nights at clubs and lounges, showing off the same bag Emeka had nearly starved to buy. When Emeka asked her to spend more time with him, she scoffed. "Emeka, you're walla too much. Every time. Come and sit down with you inside your hot room? I'm not old to beg." Her words felt like bullets, shattering whatever pieces of his heart remained. Then one afternoon, as he sat quietly at a small cafe with his sketchpad, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Is that a gear system for a motorcycle?" He looked up and saw a woman, dark-skinned, no makeup, in jeans and a branded polo. Her name was Chinonai, a tech enthusiast and hardware engineer. That single question lit a fire in Emeka's chest that had long grown cold. They talked for hours. Chinonai listened, really listened, as Emeka poured out his vision. He showed her his old sketches, his prototypes made from scrap, and his dream to create affordable eco-friendly motorcycles designed for Nigeria's rugged roads. For the first time, someone didn't laugh. She nodded, made notes, even offered to help him polish the designs for pitching. "You have something real here," she said, her eyes bright. Emeka couldn't believe it. In a world that mocked his poverty and laughed at his dreams, this stranger believed in him, without asking what he had. As they walked away from the cafe that evening, he felt lighter. Hope had begun to grow roots again, all because of one person who saw more in him than what he wore. Meanwhile, Amaka was deepening her ties with Yemi, the man she had once sworn she didn't like. He was flashy, arrogant, and loud. But he had money, and that was all she needed now. Emeka tried to reach her one last time, asking her to believe in him one more time, to wait just a little longer. Her response was brutal. "You're a charity case, Emeka. I've done enough waiting." Go and marry that your tech friend. I'm done." She walked away that day, heels clicking with pride, without a backward glance. Emeka watched her go, the same girl he once fed under a leaking zinc roof. He said nothing, just watched. But in his silence, something new took root. Not bitterness, not revenge, but resolve. Emeka never thought he'd witness the day Amaka would officially humiliate him in public. But that day came faster than he expected. It was during the anniversary party of the logistics company he worked for. Despite his low position, he had contributed heavily to organizing the event and had even received a small recognition award for dedication. He decided to attend, hoping to unwind and maybe see Amaka to share the good news. Clutching a modest box of chocolates he had bought with a little change left after paying bills, he wore his cleanest shirt and arrived at the venue hopeful. But as he entered the reception hall, a sudden silence swept over one section of the crowd, followed by snickers. When he turned, his heart stopped. There she was, Amaka, seated on Yemi's lap, wearing a revealing dress, laughing, sipping wine, and pointing at him. "What is he doing here? Did they hire bicycle boys as ushers now?" She laughed loudly, her voice echoing across the hall. Yemi stood, walked toward Emeka, and without hesitation clapped his palm hard against Emeka's chest. "Guy, this party no be for laborers. Carry your struggle and go outside." The crowd roared with laughter. Emeka stood still, not because he was weak, but because he couldn't believe the woman he had once fed and clothed had turned him into a public joke. His hands trembled, the box of chocolates slipping from his grip and falling to the floor. Still, he picked it up slowly, straightened his shoulders, and with tears stinging his eyes, turned around and walked out. As the door closed behind him, their laughter chased him down the corridor like ghosts of everything he had tried to forget. Outside the venue, Chinonai was waiting. She had come to support him because he had mentioned the party earlier that week. When she saw the look on his face, the broken pieces in his expression, she didn't ask questions. She simply stood beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Let's build something they can never laugh at," she whispered. That night, under a street lamp, Emeka gave her the full story, every heartbreak, every slap of insult, every time he had gone hungry for love. Chinonai listened in silence. And when he finished, she didn't say sorry. She said, "You're a builder. Let's build." Her words weren't just comforting. They were a lifeline. For the first time in years, Emeka went to sleep with hope warming the parts of his soul Amaka had frozen. With Chinese guidance, Emeka began a new chapter in his life, one built on purpose, not pain. They started meeting daily after work at a small community library that had an open tech lab. There he would show her his rough sketches and models, and she would refine them on her laptop, helping create 3D digital renderings. They brainstormed for hours, sometimes skipping dinner in the process. With every meeting, Chinonai brought structure to Emeka's vision. She encouraged him to apply for a local startup grant. When he hesitated, afraid that his background would disqualify him, she filled the form on his behalf and submitted it anyway. "You don't need a suit to change the world," she reminded him. Her confidence in him was contagious and dangerous. It pushed him beyond what he thought he was capable of. Emeka's schedule became brutal. He still worked his delivery job during the day to survive, but his nights were now dedicated to research, refining, and learning. He watched videos on battery technology, studied how motorcycles were designed in Asia, and even joined free webinars. He barely slept more than 3 hours a night. There were times he collapsed in exhaustion, only for Chinonai to find him curled in a corner of the library with his sketchbook clutched to his chest. She would wake him gently, give him bread and sachet water, and urge him on. It wasn't romantic at first. It was a mission, a shared goal. And that made it even more powerful. For once, Emeka was pouring his energy into something that gave back, not someone who drained him dry. Meanwhile, Amaka was enjoying the fake luxury of her new life with Yemi. She posted pictures daily, new shoes, club nights, spa days. She flaunted designer bags on Instagram and made subtle jabs and captions. "Don't settle for less. You deserve more." She was the kind of woman who believed suffering was for fools, forgetting that without Emika's sacrifices, she wouldn't even have basic school certificates. But Yemi had begun to show signs of control. He monitored her calls, snapped at her in public, and refused to give her money unless she earned it with sex or silence. Still, Amaka chose to ignore the red flags. As long as the flashy car was outside and money was in her account, she convinced herself it was love. But behind her filters and hashtags was a hollow pit of loneliness she refused to admit. When the grant committee finally replied, Emika and Chinonai were invited to pitch their prototype idea. Emika wore an ironed but faded shirt, borrowed a tie from his neighbor, and arrived shaking from nerves. Inside the small conference room, 5 board members stared at him like he was a nuisance. "You're trying to build motorcycles with what money?" one asked, smirking. Another laughed and said, "Even your shoes are begging. Why should we believe in this dream?" The humiliation was unbearable. But just before Emika could lose his courage, Chinonai stood up. With fire in her voice, she explained their innovation: eco-efficient two-wheelers powered by rechargeable batteries, suited for African roads. She shared the long-term model, the cost efficiency, and the potential for job creation. The room fell silent, not because they were convinced, but because they hadn't expected the bicycle boy to sound so serious. Despite the clarity of the pitch, they were denied the grant. "Come back when you have something more tangible," they said, handing the rejection letter with cold politeness. Emika walked out feeling like someone had gutted him. Chinonai tried to cheer him up, but even she looked disappointed. That evening, he went back to the community tech hub and sat in silence, staring at the prototype they had built with scrap metals and wires. Then he did something unexpected. He recorded a raw video of himself explaining the idea, demonstrating the prototype in motion, and ended with a line: "We don't have money, but we have vision. Help us build Africa's future." Chinonai posted it on Twitter with a simple caption: "Please don't scroll past this." By morning, the video had over 300,000 views. Influencers, tech bloggers, and even international journalists had begun tagging brands and tech hubs. Emails started flooding in. One in particular stood out: a Nigerian-American investor based in Kenya who wanted to fly in and meet them. Emika sat on his bed, phone in hand, tears rolling silently down his cheeks. All the pain, all the mockery, all the insults, all the nights he had gone to bed hungry it hadn't been in vain. For the first time in his life, people were clapping, not at him, but for him. He wasn't just a delivery boy anymore. He was a visionary. And the world had finally begun to listen. The investor arrived in Nigeria within 2 weeks. His name was Mr. Chinedu, a young Nigerian-American entrepreneur who had grown up in Ajagunle and now owned one of East Africa's fastest-growing tech firms. He had seen Emika's video on Twitter and said it reminded him of his own journey. When he met Emika and Chinonai at the small garage they had converted into a workshop, he didn't comment on their worn clothes or crude equipment. Instead, he asked, "Where do you see this in 5 years?" Emika spoke with fire in his belly. He painted a vision of Cycle One Motors, a homegrown, affordable motorcycle brand tailored for African roads, powered by clean energy and maintained by locals. Mr. Ease was impressed by the ambition, but more so by the integrity and resilience he saw in Emika's eyes. Within a month, the paperwork was signed. Emika received his first real funding, enough to build a team, rent a proper space, and develop a production-ready prototype. Cycle One Motors became more than just a project. It became a mission. Emika didn't forget his roots. He hired youths from the same neighborhoods he had once delivered to. He trained former Okada riders to be assembly workers, brought in engineering students for internships, and partnered with Chinonai to lead the technical team. The first fleet of motorcycles was launched under a model named C1 Ama, inspired by Amaka, not as a tribute, but as a reminder of what he overcame. The motorcycles were sleek, efficient, and affordable, designed for rough terrain with durable frames and solar charging options. Media houses started showing interest. NTA, Channels TV, and even BBC Africa reached out. Suddenly, the boy who was mocked on a bicycle was now sitting on panels with CEOs. But Emika remained grounded. His clothes were still modest, his voice still calm, and his heart still humble. Meanwhile, Amaka's social media was quiet. She no longer posted photos of spa visits or beach trips. Yemi had grown increasingly abusive. His money still flowed, but so did the insults, the slaps, and the threats. If she asked questions, he called her useless. If she cried, he'd lock her in a room and leave her hungry. Amaka, who once rolled her eyes at Emeka's promises, now looked at her reflection with disgust. The bags under her eyes, the bruises she hid with makeup, the broken spirit, they told a story of a woman who had traded loyalty and love for fake glitter. And she couldn't go back. She had burned that bridge the day she laughed at a man riding a bicycle. Yemi's temper grew worse as the months passed. At first, the abuse was verbal, cruel words thrown like knives whenever she spoke out of turn. He would yell at her in front of friends, call her empty-headed, or compare her body to other women's. Then the first slap came, and Amaka told herself it was just a bad day. But it wasn't. It became routine. If she questioned his phone calls, slap. If she refused to give him her ATM card, slap. If she dared to cry, he would mock her tears and threaten to throw her out. She had nowhere else to go. She had left home years ago and severed ties with everyone who ever warned her about chasing flashy men. She had mocked her past so much, she couldn't even ask forgiveness from it now. Amaka began to shrink into herself. Her once vibrant laughter was replaced with silence. She stopped visiting salons, stopped attending parties, and even deactivated her social media. She had become a prisoner in her own luxury apartment, trapped by a man who treated her like a possession, not a partner. One evening, after a particularly vicious beating that left a cut on her lip, she reached for her phone and searched Cycle One Motors. She stared at Emeka's face on the screen, now wearing a fitted navy blue suit, standing beside a row of motorcycles bearing his name. Her heart shattered. This was the same man she had mocked, abandoned, insulted, and belittled. And now the world clapped for him. She remembered how he once begged her to wait, how he once gave her his last money, how he once sat in front of her house for hours just to say good night. Tears streamed down her face as she watched his video interview. "I wasn't always this man," Emeka said on screen. "There were days I begged people to believe in me. Days I went to bed hungry so someone I love could smile. But sometimes, the people you give your everything to are not the ones meant to walk with you into destiny. And that's okay. You must still walk." Amaka dropped the phone and screamed. She screamed from a place deep inside, not just from pain, but from realization. She had been the reason she was suffering. Not Yemi, not Emeka, herself, her pride, her impatience, her greed. The love she had thrown away had turned into gold, and she had turned her back on it for a monster with a wallet. And now, all she had left were bruises and regrets. The next morning, Amaka stood at the balcony, staring into the empty street below. Her body ached, but her soul ached more. For the first time in years, she typed Emeka's name into Facebook search bar and clicked through his page. It was filled with praise, employee features, product launches, and testimonials. But one picture stopped her heart. Emeka and Chinonai, dressed in matching native attire, holding hands and smiling like a couple that had weathered storms together. She zoomed in and saw something she never expected. A ring on Chinonai's finger. They were engaged. Emeka had proposed. And the internet had erupted with love and admiration. She stared at the photo for hours, scrolling through comments like power couple. She believed in him when no one else did. And love that builds. Amaka dropped her phone and wept like a child. She remembered the night she told Emeka he wasn't good enough. The night he gave her his last kobo and she called him useless. The night she laughed at his gift in front of her friends. All those moments now came back like arrows to the chest. She whispered to herself, "I had him, and I let him go." Yemi walked in at that moment, saw her crying, and without asking questions, smacked her across the head. "Why are you crying like a goat? If you want to leave, get out and go beg your bicycle boyfriend to take you back." But Amaka couldn't even reply. She just lay still on the floor, broken in every way. The man she left Emeka for had become her curse. and the man she had betrayed had become someone else's blessing. Emeka, unaware of her tears, continued building. He and Chino and I were now in talks with international investors to expand Cycle 1 into East and West Africa. They were working on a new design that could switch between electric and fuel, a game changer in the industry. And every night Emeka prayed, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for peace, peace from the pain he had endured and peace for the woman who once broke him. She didn't know any better, he told Chino and I one night as they walked by the beach. But you did, and that's why you're the one I'm building with. Chino and I leaned into him and smiled. The waves crashed softly beside them, but their hearts were calm. Emeka had finally found the love he always deserved, not one built on beauty or entitlement, but on vision, patience, and shared purpose. The auditorium was packed, buzzing with excitement. Cycle 1 Motors had just won the Innovation Award for Sustainable Mobility in Africa, and Emeka was at the center of it all. The event wasn't just a celebration of his engineering breakthrough. It was a moment that would redefine him in the eyes of the world. After accepting the award, he stood at the podium, gripping the microphone with steady hands, his voice calm but full of strength. This award is not just mine, he said. It belongs to every mechanic who ever dreamed, every delivery boy who was laughed at, and most importantly, it belongs to the woman who believed in me before the world saw me. The audience erupted in applause. Then he paused, turned toward the front row, and walked down the stage. Chino and I looked up, confused at first, until he knelt down in front of her, holding out a small velvet box. Gasps filled the air as the camera zoomed in. Chinese hands flew to her mouth as Emeka opened the box to reveal a beautiful, custom-designed engagement ring, shaped like a wheel rim, with a tiny golden emblem of the first prototype they built together. Chino and I, he said, you didn't fall in love with what I had. You fell in love with what I carried inside. You built with me, suffered with me, fought for me. Marry me, and let's continue this journey as partners in love, life, and legacy. Chinese eyes welled up as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Emeka slid the ring onto her finger and embraced her as the audience gave them a standing ovation. Videos of the moment flooded social media within hours. Hashtags like #CycleOfLove and #EngineerQueen trended across the country. Amaka saw the clip by accident while scrolling YouTube on Yemi's tablet. The algorithm, perhaps sensing her guilt, had pushed the video onto her screen. At first, she thought it was just another tech award clip, until she saw Emeka's face. Her fingers froze, trembling as she watched him kneel and propose. When she saw Chino and I accept the ring, her chest tightened. It was like watching a version of herself, the woman she could have been if she had just waited, just believed. She dropped the tablet and ran to the bathroom, locking herself in. There, she stared at her reflection, swollen cheeks, a healing bruise, eyes dark from sleepless nights. She collapsed to the floor and cried, not just from heartbreak, but from the crushing realization that she had thrown away a diamond for a demon in designer shoes. 2 months later, Amaka received a white envelope with her name embossed in gold. At first, she thought it was another unpaid bill, or maybe one of Yemi's fake luxury subscriptions. But when she opened it, her fingers stiffened. It was a wedding invitation. The names Emeka Obi and Chinonai Okonkwo were elegantly printed across the front. The date, venue, and dress code followed. Her hands trembled as she read it over and over, trying to believe it was real. 1,000 thoughts flooded her mind. Why would he invite her? Was this a taunt? A way to show her what she had lost? Or perhaps a chance for closure? Despite her confusion, a strange urge took over her. She had to attend. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed to confirm that the man she once had, the same man she mocked, insulted, and discarded, was truly marrying someone else. Yemi laughed when he saw the invitation. So your bicycle boy is now hosting weddings? In a hotel, he sneered. Let's go. I want to see how you look watching your ex walk down the aisle. Amaka didn't respond. She had lost the energy to argue with Yemi. These days, she just existed, in silence, in survival. But deep inside, The thought of seeing Emeka again stirred a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to say something, anything. The day of the wedding arrived, and she wore her best dress, even though it barely fit anymore. Yemi threw on an expensive agbada, only to impress strangers. They arrived in a black car that used to bring her pride, but now only reminded her of what it had cost her to sit inside. The wedding venue was like nothing Amaka had ever imagined. It wasn't just beautiful, it was majestic. Rows of Cycle One motorcycles were lined up like guards of honor outside the gate, polished to perfection. The hall shimmered with floral arrangements and glowing lights. There was a small expo corner displaying Emeka and Chinese innovations. Guests from across the country mingled, many from tech, engineering, and even political circles. As Amaka stepped inside, she felt invisible. No one recognized her, no one pointed her out, unlike the old days when her beauty turned heads. And then she saw him, Emeka, standing tall in a white and gold agbada, eyes clear, smile wide. He looked like a man reborn. And beside him, Chinonai, radiant in an ivory dress that sparkled with every step. Amaka's throat tightened. She had never seen him look so complete. She had never felt so empty. As the ceremony began, Amaka and Yemi sat quietly at the back. She tried to keep her head down, but her eyes never left Emeka. Every vow, every laugh, every shared glance between him and Chinonai pierced her heart like glass. When Emeka stood up to give his speech, the entire hall fell silent. He took a deep breath and smiled, then began. There was a time I had nothing but a bicycle and a dream. People laughed. I was mocked. I was even told I wasn't enough. But I kept building, not just machines, but myself. And along the way, I met someone who saw more in me than anyone else ever had. Chinonai, thank you for never laughing at my bicycle. The hall exploded in applause, but in the back row, Amaka buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The words stung more than any slap Yemi had ever given her. Yemi, irritated by her tears, whispered coldly, "You better behave. Cry in the car if you want." Amaka shook her head slowly. For once, she didn't care what he said. Her ears were still ringing with Emeka's words. She remembered the time he had bought her birthday gifts while starving. She remembered him walking her to school with borrowed money. She remembered the promises he made, and how she spat on them in pursuit of glitter. That glitter had burned her, left her scarred, and now she was standing at the edge of a life she could have had, not as a guest, not even as a friend, but as a stranger. She didn't even exist in his world anymore. After the ceremony, as Emeka and Chinonai made their way out, they passed near the corner where Amaka sat. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Emeka paused. Chinonai looked over, but said nothing. Amaka stood slowly, lips trembling. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Just silence. And in that silence, Emeka gave her a small nod, not of forgiveness, not of affection, but of acknowledgement. Then he walked away, hand in hand with the woman who had helped him build an empire. Amaka sat back down, numb, as the sounds of joy and celebration faded into the background. She had mocked his bicycle. She didn't know it would become the foundation of a kingdom. And now, she wasn't even fit to be a servant in it. The wedding reception was filled with laughter, music, and celebration. The kind that echoed with true joy, not forced smiles. Emeka and Chinonai danced as the crowd chanted their names. Videos were streamed live, and social media platforms exploded with admiration. But in a far corner of the hall, Amaka sat like a shadow of her former self, completely unnoticed. The once popular girl who turned heads at events now sat silently, watching a future that could have been hers unfold without her. Yemi, already irritated by the grandeur, began to drink heavily. As the couple danced their first official dance, Emeka twirled Chinonai with grace, and photographers circled like bees. Yemi scoffed. "All this noise for Bicycle Boy? Watch me show him who really has class." He rose from his seat, pulled Amaka up roughly, and dragged her toward the dance floor. "We two go dance. Let's show them style," he said arrogantly. But Amaka resisted. Yemi, please, don't. Let's not cause a scene, she whispered urgently. But Yemi didn't care. He stomped toward the front, shouting, "Make way. VIPs coming through." The music paused slightly as people turned. Emeka stopped dancing. Yemi swaggered toward him and said loud enough for the microphone nearby to catch, "Brothers, you've done well. Oh. From bicycle to bike business, small upgrade. But remember, your babe not my leftover." The hall gasped. Chinese eyes widened, guests murmured, and cameras caught the moment. Emeka didn't flinch. His security team calmly stepped forward, surrounding Yemi and escorting him out of the venue. "Let me go, Jor," Yemi yelled, struggling as the crowd booed him. It was a public disgrace of the highest order. Amaka stood frozen. The spotlight shifted to her now, and the whispers began. "Isn't that the ex-girlfriend who mocked him? She left him for that thug?" Her ears burned as shame swept over her like a wave. She turned to Emeka, hoping for eye contact, a sign of kindness. But Emeka didn't even look her way. Instead, he turned back to Chinonai and gently took her hand. "Shall we?" he asked, and they resumed their dance. In that moment, Amaka realized the most painful truth. She was now irrelevant. Not just to him, but to the life she once had. Her world spun as she slowly turned and walked out of the hall, each step heavier than the last. Behind her, the music rose again. Inside, life continued. But for Amaka, something had died. The following day, videos of Yemi's disgrace trended across platforms. Blogs wrote headlines like "Bride's Ex Causes Drama at CEO's Wedding," and "From Bicycle to Billionaire, the Story of Emeka Obi." But Emeka didn't bask in the drama. At the post-wedding brunch, he addressed the attendees in a way only he could, humble, reflective, and real. Wearing a simple native outfit, standing beside his wife, Emeka spoke softly. "When I had nothing but a bicycle, I had two choices, to give up or to keep pedaling. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered why I started. And I remembered that sometimes the people who laugh at you today will wish they stood by you tomorrow." The hall went silent. Even reporters, who came looking for controversy, found only inspiration. He continued, "There were times I gave everything, even my last naira, to people who didn't value me. I carried people who could have walked beside me. I poured into cups that only spilled back emptiness. But I don't regret it, because those experiences shaped me. They gave me vision, taught me to endure, and made me strong." He paused and glanced at Chinonai. "Then I met someone who didn't laugh at my bicycle. She grabbed the handlebars with me and said, 'Let's ride.' And today here we are." The audience clapped, some tearing up. In that moment, Emeka didn't just sound like a man who had succeeded. He sounded like a man who had healed. Chinonai took the mic briefly and added, "Behind every great dreamer is someone who dares to believe in the dream. I believed in Emeka because he was building something, not just bikes, but hope. That's what love should look like." The audience rose to their feet, cheering. At the back of the room, a few attendees whispered that Amaka had been spotted crying at the gate earlier, but was turned away by security. Emeka had given no orders to block her, but she had no courage to step forward again. Not after the disgrace of the previous night. Not after the speech that highlighted everything she had failed to be. Not after realizing she had been the one who doubted the man who was now celebrated as a national icon. Her tears weren't for losing Emeka's love. They were for losing herself. Back in their apartment, Yemi was livid. "You embarrassed me in front of Lagos elite," he shouted, throwing a glass against the wall. "Do you know who I am?" Amaka, still shaken from the previous night, tried to calm him. "Please, Yemi, let's not fight," she whispered. But it was too late. He lunged at her, slapping her so hard she hit the ground. "You were crying for that bicycle idiot, ABI? That's why you didn't want to dance. Foolish woman." He kicked over a table and stormed into the bedroom. Amaka sat on the floor, dazed, blood trickling from her lip. She looked around the apartment. The marble tiles, gold-coated chandeliers, imported furniture, all symbols of a life that had cost her peace, dignity, and now her identity. She crawled to the bathroom and locked the door, pressing her head against the cold tiles. For the first time, she admitted the truth aloud. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Days passed, and Yemi became more unpredictable. He stopped giving her money, brought other women home, and openly mocked her pain. Amaka tried calling old friends, but they had moved on. Her social media followers had dropped drastically after the viral wedding clip. No one wanted to associate with the ex who got left behind. One evening, she sat on the bed with an old photo of her and Emeka, back when he still wore slippers, and they shared a meat pie under the rain. She touched his face in the photo and sobbed. "You begged me to wait," she cried. "You gave me everything, and I wanted more. Now look at me." She stared at her reflection in the mirror, a shell of the proud, confident girl she used to be. Across town, Emeka and Chinonai were designing their next product, a hybrid three-wheeler for rural transport. Emeka laughed more now, slept better, and treated his team like family. They had opened a new factory, and his story was now taught in a business school case study. Yet, in all his success, he never spoke ill of Amaka. He didn't need to. Life had done what words never could. He had built an empire from the same ground where she had buried him with insults. And now, she was drowning in a life built on lies and greed. One that she once chose over him. One that had robbed her of peace. Emeka had moved on. But Amaka? She was just beginning to understand what she had truly lost. And the weight of that regret was something no designer bag could ever hide. Cycle One Motors had become a symbol of African innovation. Within a year of Emeka's wedding, the company expanded its production facility, partnering with universities and vocational schools across Nigeria. Emeka didn't just want to build bikes. He wanted to build people. He launched the Cycle One Fellowship, a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in mechanical engineering and renewable energy. Dozens of young men and women from slums and rural villages were enrolled, learning from the same humble roots he came from. In press interviews, Emeka emphasized community impact over profit. "If I only build machines and not minds, then I failed," he often said. Chinonai, now pregnant with twins, worked as the company's head of innovation. Together, they weren't just a couple, they were a revolution. During one outreach event, Emeka returned to the very neighborhood where he once pushed his broken bicycle up a hill every morning. Children now ran around the Cycle One demo bikes, shouting in excitement. An elderly woman hugged him tightly and whispered, "We always knew you'd make us proud." He donated new motorcycles to the local courier riders who used to laugh at him, and built a community tech hub nearby named after his late mother, the Mama Nena Innovation Center. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was emotional. With tears in his eyes, Emeka said, "My mother taught me that value isn't in what you wear or ride, but in what you carry inside." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. His bicycle days were long gone, but the memory never left him. Meanwhile, Amaka watched everything unfold from a borrowed phone in a dim apartment. Yemi had thrown her out months ago after a brutal fight, and now she lived in a tiny room behind a hair salon, doing assistant work for meager pay. Every time she saw a Cycle One bike on the road, her heart twisted in pain. They were everywhere, in cities, towns, even villages. She couldn't escape them. The logo that once meant nothing to her now haunted her dreams. Each sight of Emeka's smile on billboards and interviews reminded her of her loss. But it wasn't just about the money, the success, or the fame. It was the kind of man he had become, and how she had treated him when all he had was love. Her nights were filled with memories, her days with silence. The world had moved on, and no one remembered Amaka, not even Emeka. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when Amaka finally broke down completely. Sitting alone in her room, wet clothes hanging by the wall, and a leaking ceiling dripping into a rusted bowl, she held a worn-out letter in her hand. One Emeka had written to her years ago, when they were still struggling. It had read, "I know you're tired, but please don't give up on me. I promise one day I'll make you proud." She pressed the paper to her chest and cried until her throat was sore. She had mocked that dream. She had laughed at the man who wrote those words. And now those words were all she had. The man who once begged her to stay had become a name everyone wanted to stand beside. And she, who once had his heart, had become a distant lesson in his story. She tried reaching out once. She sent a message through someone at a Cycle 1 outreach. Emeka read it, but said nothing. Not out of hatred, but peace. He had no words left to give her, no anger left to burn. He had healed. That message was never replied to, and Amaka never tried again. She eventually heard that Chinonai had given birth to 2 beautiful boys. Their names were Kalechi and Chidera, meaning thank God, and what is written is written. The name stung her, a reminder that Emeka's blessings were now permanent, carved in destiny. She passed a billboard one day showing Emeka holding one of the babies with the caption, "Ride the future, Cycle 1." She stood there for a long time in the rain, mascara washing down her face, whispering, "I was supposed to be there." Back in their home, Emeka and Chinonai sat by the fireplace one evening, watching their sons crawl across the carpet. Emeka leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled. "For what?" He looked out the window, his voice soft but steady. "For believing in a man with nothing." Chinonai gripped his hand and replied, "You were never nothing. You were just hidden." And in that quiet moment, far away from laughter, insults, pain, or applause, Emeka finally felt the peace he had long searched for. He had been mocked, betrayed, used, and abandoned, but he had also been chosen, cherished, and fulfilled. His life had come full circle. And somewhere in a dark room across town, Amaka sat with her regrets, the sound of motorcycle engines echoing through her broken heart. Because in the end, she didn't just lose Emeka. She lost the chance to become part of something eternal. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.